My name's Rob Arizari. I have been lucky enough to get hooked up with a couple of people here that I'll talk about in a minute. I'm going to do 4 slides, and then we're going to have a quick video, and then we're going to turn the whole thing over to Brad. First thing I wanted to do, so for those of you who haven't seen this graph before on Twitter or Facebook, this is the Montana Programmer's growth curve. So as a metrics-driven guy, like, I can't help myself. So the people that are driving that, you got to stand up and turn around. Where are you? He's back there. Ian and Wes. So I met Ian and Wes back in 2008. They drove over to Bozeman from Polson one snow blizzard storm night to hang out and have a Montana Programmers meeting. Nathan is right here.
Yay.
He's from Missouri. You guys know Nathan? Right? Kermit, who couldn't make it tonight, he's the flathead guy, right? So he's driving that thing.
Yeah, Kermit.
Rob Lund, where's Rob? Rob's like, now that Ian and Wes and I are just kind of like flailing around in Bozeman, Rob's the guy making it happen logistically. Ryan Carson, did he make it?
He's not going to be.
Isn't he? Okay, so Ryan and Matt, who we still don't have a good picture of. I'm hoping this will shame him. This will shame him into giving us a good picture. So all these guys made this stuff happen, all right? And we had, what, 8 people in 2008? 400 and what's the number today?
40-something.
Okay, so if you notice carefully at the very end of the curve, there's this new scientific thing that happened starting last week. I'm calling it the Feld effect. And if you notice, we like hockey stick. I'm not sure we can sustain that, but it's pretty good.
I think you should have people raise their hand if they're part of the Feld effect.
There you go. Cool. Did you join? If you joined in the last week, you're there. And the guy who made that happen, Russ, did Russ make it?
He's over here.
Cool. Russ, I want to meet you finally. So Russ made that happen. Russ is the PR guy. And he just like spewed stuff all over and made that happen. So that was awesome. Thanks for that. So we have one thing coming up in August in Bozeman that those of you that aren't already signed up, after a year, is it a year we've been working on this? We've been working for a year, Nathan, Wes, Rob, Ian, to get together this big DevCon show. So we've got a bunch of killer speakers. It's on August 4th. You can find out about it at bigsky.devcon.org. And love to see you over there then, the first annual Big Sky DevCon. And then one last thing. So Brad, as part of this marathon that brought him to Missoula today, Brad and his wife Amy are contributing to this Give It Forward thing. And I just want to call this out. I'm a big believer in giving back to the community or giving back to people, particularly like this case, that are in need. So I'd encourage all you guys to look at the Give It Forward. You have a bunch of stuff coming up for that. Now that we're here, I'll turn it over to you, and you can. Oh, we got one other thing. I almost forgot. You're giving me the dagger eyes.
Oh no, just begging.
Hang on, just begging me. One more thing.
It's right on top.
There you go. All right.
It's you.
Is this the premiere? Is this our?
This is the premiere.
All right. So, how many of you have looked on Brad's site and seen what's the name of your VC? What's the?
I'm a VC.
I'm a VC. Anyone seen that I'm a VC video? All right, well, this is Montana's and specifically Mama Lode's answer to I'm a VC. You good there? Sound?
Jeremy!
It's everywhere.
Nice, okay. Polly and the boys over there. Oh, that's what that was. Who's gonna drop it from the white party? Yes. you. Try first. Do you have the doors to sign off on that? They were all watching.
I'll be so fun.
Sorry. You don't have the right hair either, right? Oh, let's take some pictures with the chicken wing. Let's go outside and get the boys on the tree. Oh, I love he's got his little girl in there. Is this one that you're gonna come over? Because they're just overshoot Nice job.
Poor chicken.
Look at your poster notes.
Proving once again that great entrepreneurs will do whatever it takes to make their dream happen. Do you need projector?
No projector. So they showed me that at dinner, and I had tears in my eyes. I have no talent for that sort of thing. My partner Jason does. So for those of you that haven't seen I'm a VC, it's a video like this. Although my partner Jason composed the song and wrote the music, and it was for our book Venture Deals. And if you go to the website Ask the VC, there's a video thing. You can watch the video. And there's a scene in it where we're all doing this on top of Jason's house, except for there's 3 people doing this in rhythm, and there's one person that's kind of going like this, and that's me. Thanks for having me. Let's do the following. I want to talk about startup communities for 10 or 15 minutes. I want to give you sort of a frame of reference for how I think about the notion of startup communities, and I'll give you a little historical context. But then I mostly want to go wherever y'all want to go in terms of the conversation, and it can be about anything around entrepreneurship or technology. So sort of any questions are valid. Happy to take it wherever you want. Let me do a quick sort of intro. So for those of you that don't know me or haven't met me before, have a little context, and then sort of I'll dive in. I started my first company in 1987, right out of school. I had $10. So we essentially self-funded and bootstrapped a business. I sold it in 1993 to a public company, and then started investing in 1994 with some of the money that I made from that public company, or from the sale of my company. So I've essentially been investing from 94 forward. My wife, Amy, and I moved to Boulder from Boston in 1995. And we moved to Boulder, she's from Alaska, I'm from Dallas. Boston wasn't home. We'd been there for 12 years, which we like to say was 11 years and 364 days too many. And Boston was very good to us, but it wasn't home. And when I sold my first company, I told her that we'd leave Boston by the time I turned 30, and about 2 months before I turned 30, she told me she was moving to Boulder and I could come with her if I wanted to. And we both, knew Colorado. We'd been to Boulder, and we knew the Rocky Mountain West, and sort of had this idea of, well, if it doesn't work, we'll just keep going west. We'll go to California. I didn't like the Bay Area that much. I was spending a lot of time, and I didn't want to live there. I was good for 3 days or 4 days in San Francisco. Kind of the same as I was in New York, 3-4 days, great, and then get me the fuck out of here. There's enough of this. I gotta go for a walk in the mountains somewhere. So I moved to Boulder in '95, and 6 months later, bought a house and decided that was home. We'd found our place. And so I've lived there ever since. And I've been through a couple of phases as an investor. In '94 to '96, I was an angel investor with my own money, writing $25,000 and $50,000 checks. I made about 40 investments in that time period. How many people here have played Guitar Hero or Rock Band? So that was one of my first angel investments. I was part of the original group that invested in that. I was an investor in a company called NetGenesis, which was one of the early web analytics companies. Angel investor in a company called Critical Path, which was one of the very first email hosting companies. So if you think about email in the 1997, 98, 99 timeframe, sort of pre-Hotmail even, most people had a server somewhere that was, either, an Exchange server, a Note server, or some sort of, SendMail server. And Critical Path was the first company that sort of put that in the cloud before people called it the cloud. So I invested in a bunch of those companies. In 1997, I hooked up with these guys from what was a Japanese company called SoftBank, or is a Japanese company called SoftBank. We started making investments in the US actually in '96. We raised a fund in '97, so myself and 3 other guys started a firm that turned into what became Mobius Venture Capital. SoftBank was our sponsor, but it was our business. We had great success in sort of the first fund, 97, 98, 99. We raised a much larger fund in 99. So $300 million fund in 97 did very well. $600 million fund in 1999, that was a disaster. And then a $1.2 billion fund in 2000 that's ended up doing okay. In that first fund, we had investments like GeoCities, if people remember GeoCities, perpetuating shitty stuff on the internet. We're now investors in Cheeseburger, perpetuating really amusing stuff on the internet. But Mobius was an interesting experience for me because my partners were all West Coast based, and the firm was West Coast based, although I was in Boulder. So I spent a lot of time in the Bay Area, a lot of time sort of in that venture scene, but I continued to invest all around the US. So my investments were always Boston, New York, Colorado, obviously, Seattle, Los Angeles, San Francisco, and then other random places, Chicago, Portland. So I sort of had this mindset that I could do early stage software internet investing anywhere. And in 2005 or early 2006, we decided not to raise another fund as a team at Mobius, the remaining partners that were there. The internet bubble was tough on us. We scaled the organization way back. We sort of got things back to a decent place. But we really didn't have a long-term vision as a firm, and we had a group of people that had changed a lot. And there was a whole series of other things that probably aren't that important in the context of this conversation. And what that led to was myself and 3 of the people that I worked with at Mobius started a new fund called Foundry Group, which we raised our first fund in 2007, $225 million fund, and then we raised another $225 million fund in 2010. We still manage all the old Mobius stuff as well. So the Foundry part, the 4 of us, we don't really have any Mobius partners anymore. We just have continued to manage the Mobius stuff through end of life. Sort of along this path, we decided to all be in Boulder. So part of the dynamic for starting Foundry Group was not to have remote offices. Somebody asked me at dinner tonight the dynamics of remote offices. It's hard in general, and for a venture firm, if you're the one person in the remote office, your life sucks because you're basically always going to where the other people are. So we decided we all wanted to be together. We also decided we never wanted to grow. So we've raised 2 funds, each exactly the same size. We'll raise a 3rd fund, exactly the same size. We only invest in software internet. We only invest in the US. We have a set of themes that we define. If it's outside of something you're doing is outside of a theme of ours, It's not what we do. If it's within a theme, we go very, very deep on the people and the products. And we do about a dozen investments a year. So pretty steady cadence of new investments. Some of the companies that you may know, we were early investors in a company called Zynga, which perpetuated Farmville on the universe. And I was on the board of that company until just before it went public. We were investors in a company called AdMeld, which Google bought about a year ago for about $400 million. That essentially was the pioneer in what's called DSP, or part of the advertising supply chain, sort of real-time advertising. I mentioned Cheeseburger, but we're investors in a bunch of other companies. Anybody here know SendGrid or use SendGrid? So we're early investors in SendGrid. And we have a lot of fun. So my partners and I are very sort of deep in the companies we work with, but from a product and support of the entrepreneur perspective. So we don't have any associates, just the four of us. We do all the work. And we're very, very focused on doing whatever it takes to help the founders and the entrepreneurs be successful. We're not funding companies with the idea that the entrepreneurs and the leaders of the companies are replaceable. We're funding them where if we have to replace them for some reason, something's probably fucked up. And it happens occasionally, and occasionally entrepreneurs, like in the case of SendGrid, it's not fucked up. The entrepreneur, Isaac, who was a first-time entrepreneur, the company went from nothing to 30 people in 6 months, and he's like, I have no idea what I want to do with this. I don't want to be the CEO. I want to be the CTO. Help. And we helped him find a CEO. Here's a couple of people that would be great CEOs, and the guy who's his partner now, Jim Franklin, who's the CEO, is doing spectacular. Another sort of counterexample of that would be Judd Valesky, who was at Netscape and then was at AOL for a while and started GNIP with another partner. His partner left. Judd, who was the CTO of GNIP, became the CEO, and GNIP went from a half dozen people to a dozen people and was really starting to accelerate. And I said to Judd, you need a partner, you need a business partner. And I said, you don't need a CEO, you just need a partner. And if you want to be CEO, you should be CEO. If you don't want to be CEO, you should find somebody to be CEO, but figure that out. And Judd wanted to be CEO, and he ended up bringing in a guy named Chris Moody as his COO, I think is Chris's title, or maybe president. And the company has grown from that dozen people to now about 50 people in 12 months. It's doing extremely well. I can't invest more money in the company. I've been trying to shove it down their throats, and they won't take it because they don't need it, because they've been growing profitably. But it's an example where it's sort of this process that we try to take of supporting the entrepreneurs and helping them win. So that's just a really deep philosophy of ours in terms of how we do things. Along the way, I co-founded Techstars. How many here don't know what Techstars is? Anybody? A couple people. So Techstars is a mentor-driven accelerator that was started in Boulder in 2007. You may be familiar with an accelerator called Y Combinator. So Y Combinator was the first accelerator, Techstars was the second. They take a somewhat different approach to what they do. One of the principles of Y Combinator is that the only place worth doing startups is in the Bay Area. And so if you want to do a Y Combinator related thing, move to the Bay Area, which is fine. Techstars' point of view was you can have a startup anywhere you want. And so we started the first Techstars program in Boulder. We now have programs in New York, Boston, Seattle. We have one in San Antonio in conjunction with Rackspace called Techstars Cloud for cloud computing companies. We have one in Seattle called the Microsoft Accelerator that does stuff around, we just ran a Connect program, we're running an Azure program. And then we helped create something called the Global Accelerator Network, which is about another 50 accelerators around the US, around the world actually, that are doing this similar sort of mentor-driven accelerator. So it's 10 companies or so go into the program, 90 days later come out of the program, and you have a demo day where the goal is, as companies come out of the program, that they either are bootstrapped or funded. Techstars gives them money, so we actually invest about $20,000 in each company. We get a small amount of equity that looks like founder stock in the company. It's usually about 6%. Those companies then are surrounded by mentors from the community, and those mentors actively engage with helping the companies accelerate through the 90 days. And it's been pretty remarkable to have seen what has come out of this program. We publish all the results if you're curious. So if you go to techstars.com/results, you can actually see every company that's ever been through the program, how many employees they have today, whether they're alive or not, whether they've been acquired, and so forth. So I've been very involved in that as well. So I've done all of this stuff, starting as an entrepreneur, but then as an angel and now venture investor, from the vantage point of Boulder, Colorado. Investing around the U.S. and being involved in lots of different places in the U.S., but with this pretty deeply held belief, or very deeply held belief, that you can start a company anywhere. And also, I'm a nerd. I come from a software development background, a view that the product drives the business at the early stages. And it's not that the founders have to be technical founders, but the founders have to be product oriented. And it's good to have a mix between business and product, but you want to have a product-leaning founding team. And so as investors, we're looking for and focused on the product. Once it's sort of in an area that we're interested in, we go very, very deep on that and very deep on the people, with the idea of, do we want to work with these people on this product to try to build a business over a long period of time, recognizing that we're working for the entrepreneurs. We're providing capital, but we're also providing help, expertise, so forth. And as part of that, I spent a lot of time thinking about how startup communities develop. So in the context of Boulder, I've been there now 16 plus years. When I moved there were startups, but Boulder wasn't really known as a nationally recognized startup community. And I don't know what the perception in this room is, so I will simply assert it rather than do a survey. But my assertion today would be that Boulder is one of the strongest startup communities in the country, even though it's a relatively small place. It's about the same size as your city. It's 100,000 people. You guys are 60, 70,000 people here. And the Boulder Metro is about 250, so a little bit bigger, but still on the very small side of a geography with incredible density of startups, incredible number of companies that are startup oriented, and an incredibly welcoming community around that dynamic that's continuing to accelerate as time passes versus sort of plateau. So I spent a fair amount of time thinking about that in the context of Boulder. I lived in Boston for 12 years, as you remember, 11 years and 364 days, too many. But I was an entrepreneur there, so I spent a lot of time in the Boston entrepreneurial community in the 80s and 90s. And I've subsequently invested a lot in Boston since. Spent a lot of time in New York, spent a lot of time in the Bay Area, spent a lot of time in Seattle, and sort of thought about what are the characteristics that separate these sort of vibrant startup communities from, pick one that's not thought of as a great startup community. Iowa City, right? Or Kansas City, or even Richmond, Virginia. I mean, these are cities with real intellectual resources, university, lots of smart people, lots of business, lots of stuff. But what makes some accelerate and build these startup communities that are significant over time and others don't? So I came up with 4 principles around this, and I want to sort of give you the 4 principles because I think they apply anywhere. I've written a book that I just submitted to the publisher the other day that'll be out in September, called Startup Communities, Building an Entrepreneurial Ecosystem in Your City. If you're interested in sort of following along, there's a website, there's a series of books coming that are called, in the Startup Revolution series is what it's called. If you go to c.startuprev.com, you'll get the Startup Communities blog, or just go to startuprev.com and you'll see all of the different books that are coming. And sort of in this book, I've codified, and I've used Boulder as an example to describe and use it to really illustrate what happened sort of around the dynamics of startup community. Not as a justification of Boulder, not in a look here how great Boulder is, but to try to give an example. Boulder has plenty of issues, and I spend some time in the book talking about the weaknesses and the things that we need to do better over the next 20 years. But to try to give people a sense of why you can do this anywhere you want. So let me give you the 4 principles now that I've given you a little bit of background and wind up. So first and foremost is that the startup community has to be led by entrepreneurs. That's just the most important part. I separate the world into feeders and leaders. And feeders are important and leaders are important, but they're different. And in a startup community, the only real leaders are entrepreneurs. University, government, venture investor, angel investors, big business, service providers, they're all in the feeder category. And that's not to make them less important than the leaders. It's different, and the roles and responsibilities are different. In the absence of entrepreneurs being leaders, you can't have, in my view, a sustainable startup community. It just won't happen. And it's not that every entrepreneur has to be a leader. You have to have a relatively small nexus to start. So in Boulder, if you sort of trace it back to when things started accelerating at different points in time, there were usually a half a dozen to a dozen people that were driving the activity. It was like, to get the meetup to 500 people, you didn't need 30 people. You didn't need an organized committee. You didn't need a president, a vice president, a membership chair, an education chair, right? You just needed a couple of people, and you just need to do some shit. And that's the essence of what leaders do. And I describe the framework for that as the difference between a network and a hierarchy. And I think this is sort of a key place to start as we roll through the rest of them. Business and most companies and most institutions, whether it's a university or government, are structured as hierarchies, right? There's somebody on top. There's a whole hierarchical thing that comes down. People have their roles, and you work your way up through the hierarchy. And in politics, the word politics comes from the idea that there's crap going on sort of throughout the hierarchy as you work your way up the hierarchy. But fundamentally, it's a hierarchy, and there's roles and responsibilities and expectations. Hierarchies turn into bureaucracies, and bureaucracy has a connotation that can be positive or negative, military, positive or negative, doesn't matter. There's dynamics in a hierarchy. Entrepreneurs function as a network. And the society that we're living in today is increasingly a network. You want to interact with me, just send me an email to brad@feld.com. If you say, I heard you talk at the Montana thing, I'll respond to you. How many people here sent me an email and had me respond to them? I respond pretty quickly?
Yeah.
2 hours.
Am I substantive?
Yeah.
Now, 100% of the human population doesn't behave that way, but increasingly more and more people are behaving. You don't have to go through my staff to get to the point where somebody will present with me your request to have an interaction with me, which could result in me approving a meeting that will happen at some future, right? But that's what a hierarchy is. And again, society, in the last 100 years has behaved, industrial society has behaved that way. Information society toasts that, right? And you can get my attention by just on Twitter saying, hey, @BFeld, blah, blah, blah. Hey, @BFeld, why didn't you do blah? And I'll respond. I might say, I don't know what you're talking about, but you can get someone's attention in that way. So if entrepreneurs function in a network and much of the rest of society functions in a hierarchy, but we're shifting, I believe very strongly that we're shifting from a hierarchy to a network very aggressively, and all the technology that we use help enable that. What it means is that entrepreneurs have this incredible advantage over the rest of society because of the lack of friction for communication in a network. Really, it just takes initiative. It takes your willingness to put yourself out there and give it a shot, which, oh, by the way, again, is what entrepreneurs do. So number one, entrepreneurs have to lead. If you want to have a vibrant startup community in Missoula, in Bozeman, and I'll talk about neighborhoods in a second, what I mean by neighborhoods in the context of community. Number two, they have to take a long-term view. So how many years is in a generation, sort of a classical notion of a generation? Anybody know the number? 20. Whoever said 20. So a generation is 20 years. And so, in our lifetime, if somebody lives to be 80, they might live through 4 generations. Okay? I think it takes about a generation to go from scratch to a sustainable startup community. And I think if you want to have a sustainable startup community, you have to constantly have a generational view going forward. So you have to take a long-term view from today, 20 years from today. And in 5 years, you still have to have a 20-year view. Because it's not the kind of thing that you sort of can start and in 2 years it's awesome. And it might be awesome, but in 3 years it might suck. And you have this macro phenomena which you have no control over. Do we have any control over the global financial economic crisis? No. Do you have any real control over what happens geopolitically and economically throughout the world? If you think you do, awesome. You don't. But you have an enormous amount of control over what's happening locally, what's happening in the micro, what's happening with your business, what's happening with the ideas that you have and the things that you're inspired by and what you want to work on. Those things take a long time. Government runs in 2 and 4 year cycles. And most of government is 2 and 4 year cycles with a minus 6 months on either side. Right? Because there's an election and then there's everybody gets fired or changed or doesn't know what to do for the next 6 months after the election, as everybody has to write their policy papers about what to do. So in your worst case, government has 1 year every 2 years to do something useful. Right? Normatively, government kind of gets something done usefully 2 out of every 4 years, maybe 2.5 out of every 4 years. 4 years is like nothing for a startup. Right? Most of the companies I've been involved in that are successful, every now and then, I mean, Zynga was successful in 4 years, but I'm on the board of a company called Return Path that's now 12, going on 13 years old, to go public next year. I mean, it takes a long time to build a real company. And so the idea that what you're doing is a 2-year journey is flawed. So take a long-term view. A lot of people say 20 years, I can't think about 20 years. How many people here want to live how many people here are from Missoula? And how many people here are from Bozeman? How many people here are from Montana? I'll broaden that aperture a little bit. And how many of you 20 years from now think you'll be somewhere other than Montana? Couple. Raise your hand, be honest. It's okay. And it's totally fine to not be here 20 years from now. But the vast majority of people who think they're going to be here 20 years from now, if you want this place to be amazing as a startup community, it's up to you. But take that long view. Number 3, you have to be inclusive of anyone who wants to engage. And this is, I think, one of the magical things about Boulder, and it's one of the very powerful things about some of the great startup communities. Bay Area has this in spades. It was one of the challenges I felt in Boston when I lived there in the late 80s and early 90s, because I was typecast. I like to say I was typecast as MIT Jewish software guy. Which was what I was. But it's kind of annoying to be like stuck in that little box. Like, okay, but what does that mean? And what it meant was that there were some things I didn't get invited to. 30 years ago it meant there were some country clubs you couldn't join or some bullshit like that. But fundamentally it means that you're being excluded from some category of things. Gender, race, ethnicity, background, whatever, it doesn't matter. You have to turn it inside out. Anyone who wants to engage has to be welcome. It has to be easy. How many of you have ever been to Boulder? Okay. Did you find it difficult did anybody in the room find it difficult to get introduced to other people in Boulder that were doing the kinds of things you're working on? Okay. Next time somebody comes to Boulder and wants to be involved with entrepreneurs, send me an email. It was great to see no hands go up. Send me an email, say, I'll be in Boulder for the following couple of days. I'd love to get some introductions to some people that are doing blah. I will pick 5 to 10 entrepreneurs and introduce you to them from that, saying, hey, so-and-so is going to be in Boulder. If you're around, can you get together? If not, can you make an intro to somebody else that's relevant? And whenever that happens, literally, like within a day, the person sends me back a note saying, oh, that was unbelievable. I have no time left. Right? It's just everybody welcomes you. And it's not like we have to have a committee to vet you, to see if you are worthy of us spending our time with you. Or that you have to come to this thing on this date, to get the pass so that you can go meet with these other people. Or the sort of bullshit, I'll make some introductions and I make an introduction to somebody useless just to feel like I did something good for you. It's this sort of notion of anyone's positive. Be inclusive of anyone. And people sort themselves out. I like to say I get asked continually throughout the day from people who want something. And sometimes I can help and sometimes I can't. I try to be responsive. But oftentimes people say, I'd love to get involved with blah. I'd love to get involved with a company. I'd love to get involved with a project. I'd love to get involved with the thing. I want to learn more about so-and-so. I want to get involved in the startup community. I want to get involved in Techstars. And what I've come to is a very simple model, which I offer to every entrepreneur and every person, but especially entrepreneurs and people that want to try to lead in startup communities. You're always looking for those people. right? You need more people. It's true in a company too. The best thing you can do when somebody approaches you like that is give them an assignment. Give them a simple assignment that they can do in somewhere between minutes and an hour without specific knowledge. The amazing thing is 50% of the people will go away and never come back. And it is a beautiful thing. Because those 50% of the people could spend an infinite amount of your time and do nothing. But if you give them a simple assignment and they can't do a simple assignment, they volunteered. They said, I want to help somehow. Okay, here's a simple assignment. If they won't do that or can't do that or choose not to do that, no judgment. They've just filtered themselves out. The balance of the people split into two categories. One category are people who do the assignment. They come back, like my dog comes back to me. Here's the thing. You asked me for a business card with a mountain on it. Here's a business card with a mountain on it. Awesome. Okay, so I know that person is good at doing assignments, so I give you another assignment. And keep going. And eventually, you might get tired of getting assignments, or more likely, you'll start taking more initiative. 25% of the people, I say, can you get me a business card with mountains on it? The person comes back with 30 of them and says, and I put them in order of the person that I think is most relevant to this thing that I think is useful and important. And I've actually got them all signed up now to do this thing. Does that make sense? Those are the leaders. Right? So you're constantly looking in the community to make it easy and to encourage people to get in and then just do things. And it's remarkable to me to watch what happens when somebody says, I want to do something, and they're a natural leader. And you say, just go do it. So many of us have been conditioned that that's not okay. You have to ask permission. Right? The committee has to tell you it's okay. The boss has to say, yes, you can do it. The membership chair has to say that's content that's useful. Right? Or the education chair has to say it's content that's useful. Bullshit. Just do stuff. But engage everybody. And every now and then you'll make a mistake. Every now and then there will be somebody who's a bad actor. Every now and then there will be somebody who steps over a line. I like to say, I have a rule I call the fuck me once rule. Like, everybody gets one shot. Like, one time. And it's my job to call you on it. Like, if I don't call you on it, it doesn't count. You know the yellow card concept in soccer? You get like a yellow card, you get another one, it's red card, you're out. I gotta give you the yellow card. I gotta say, tell me your name? Nathan, dude, you did this thing and it was not cool. And if you think I'm wrong, you can argue with me. Like, we can have that, right? Here's why it wasn't cool. I have to explain it to you. It's my responsibility. But you get one. And you're like, I got it. The next time you do that to me, hey, Nathan, you want to know something? I just deleted your contact record from my email. I've just blocked you from my world. By the way, I'm done with you now. Right? And that's okay. That happens every now and then. It's not going to happen to you. I can tell already. Right? But in a community, the community spits. If the community embraces everybody, it spits out the bad actor every now and then, and that's reinforcing. So number 3, you have to be inclusive of everybody and figure out mechanisms to get them involved. The last is you have to have activities and events that engage the full stack of entrepreneurs, ranging from people who want to be an entrepreneur, people who want to work for a startup, people who are first-time entrepreneurs, people who are multi-time entrepreneurs, people who are investors, who work for firms that are service providers, who are in economic development in the city government that want to somehow help entrepreneurs. You've got to do things that engage everybody. Right? I've been to my share of annual award ceremonies, Entrepreneur of the Year, City, blah, blah, Business Person of the whatever. I got a Lifetime Achievement Award at age 41. It's very depressing. I said, really? Really? And then I said, how about we call it the Half-Life Achievement Award? And I realized that was wrong too, because then my curve was like this the rest of the way. I'm like, no, wait, midlife, maybe 82 sounds good. And I want to live to be about 160, so 82 doesn't even sound that good. Those things are fine, they're flattering, they're nice, and they're useful, sort of. You want to shine a light on the people that do great things, it feels good. But that's not what I'm talking about. Right? I'm talking about things like Startup Weekend. Has there been a Startup Weekend here yet in Missoula?
We're just getting Startup Montana off the ground right now.
Startup Montana would be another example of it. Startup Weekend, how many people here don't know what a startup weekend is? Okay. It starts on Friday. You get together. You spend the entire weekend together, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. People show up. They pitch their ideas. You pick ideas. You form teams. By Sunday, you show prototypes. You give pitches. There are winners. Winners get prizes. You spend the entire weekend essentially simulating the process of starting a company. Very low risk, right? Like, worst thing happens is you eat a lot of pizza and beer and gain some weight over the weekend, and you're tired. But you get this experience of sort of all of the dynamics compressed into this very short period of time. Tension, arguments over all kinds of stuff, people you don't know having to decode relationships with new people, struggling with stuff that's not working, people that are letting you down in real time, being fatigued on Sunday morning and still having to grind through it because you have a deadline coming Sunday afternoon, all along with a whole bunch of other people experiencing the same thing. And startup community is aimed at people who want to be entrepreneurs as well as people who are entrepreneurs. So it's another good way to mix people between the two. Turns out that if you're looking to recruit for a startup, you've got a young company and you're looking for early people, startup weekends are the best places to recruit. Because oftentimes the people that show up for startup weekends are people who are interested in startups but haven't started it yet. They haven't sort of figured it out. They don't have the reason or the thing to jump to. And you might be the thing to jump to. So doing things like that, doing things like accelerators, whether it's Techstars or something else, that have this sort of cadence to them. The meetup is another example. We have in Boulder something we call the Boulder Denver New Tech Meetup that now has about 500 people come. It's been going 100. They've had 100 meetups now. I think they just crossed the 100 mark each month. About half the people every month are new. It's remarkable, right? And I mean, there's just that many people. There's 250 or so regulars, but there's this sort of continual set of new people coming. We have every other week in Boulder. We have something called Boulder Open Coffee Club. Coffee shop, hour and a half, whoever wants to show up, shows up. There's now 20, 30 regulars. I think the coffee shop holds 70 people, and it's always packed. If you're coming new to town and you're in Boulder on a Tuesday every other week, go to Open Coffee. It's the best way to get connected to people. And there's open coffee clubs all around the country. It's another thing with the cadence that you can do here. It's simple. You don't have to ask permission. The guy that owns or gal that owns a coffee club is going to be stunned and delighted to have regulars show up every 2 weeks. You get to meet these interesting people. It's low commitment. You don't have to. There's no membership fee. There's no, I have to be there every other week. You just do it. But it has a cadence and a rhythm and is part of the infrastructure. So if you put those four things together, number one, the startup community has to be led by entrepreneurs. All the feeders have an important role, but the entrepreneurs have to be the leaders. Two, the entrepreneurs, those leaders, have to take a long-term view. Three, you have to be inclusive of everyone at every level, including, by the way, the leadership. The Boulder entrepreneurial community, startup community, doesn't have a president. It doesn't have a vice president of membership. It doesn't have a vice president of communications. It just has a bunch of people doing stuff and a bunch of leaders leading. And those leaders are different. And when new people emerge as leaders, they're welcomed. And the best leaders hand stuff off constantly to other people. Somebody wants to do it, it's yours. Run with it. I've been doing it for a year or two, it's yours now. I don't have an ego attachment to being the one that created that thing or is running that thing. I want to go, there's this other thing that's missing that I want to do. And then fourth is that you have to constantly have things that engage everybody in the startup community. And when I look back on sort of what's coalesced around Boulder, and again in the book I use it as an example, we have lots of issues going forward. We actually have 5 startup communities in Boulder. We have a tech one, which is software internet, biotech, clean tech, natural foods, and LOHAS, which is lifestyle and outdoors. They're really separate. They're like these 5 parallel universes. They don't cut across each other. We don't invest in anything but tech. As a firm, I have some investments in some other companies. I have some investment in a company called Justin's, which makes peanut butter in little packages, and a couple of other food companies, because I like to invest in things I can eat with my own money because it's kind of fun. I'm an investor in a popcorn company in Boston called Quinn's Popcorn because my partner's name kid's name is Quinn, and I like popcorn. Right? I mean, you know, it was a friend referred him. It was an angel investment. I'm like, popcorn? I like popcorn. Quinn's a cool name. Okay, I'll get a hat that says Quinn on it. I'll give it to Quinn. That's worth $25,000. And that was my investment decision. But it's great. They're doing well, and it's fun. And if it's worth something, it's worth something. And right, it's the kind of dynamic of you let that play out. But in Boulder, we have these parallel universes. We have a space problem in Boulder. Once you get to about 100 people, there's no office space in the downtown core. You have to move out to the edge. And once you get to about 300 people, you have to actually move out of Boulder. Because Boulder is a no-growth city. There's no construction. We have an anti-business city council. Right? So we have things that are fighting against it. And you could raise your hand and say, oh, I give up. It's not worth it. Fuck it. We just figure it out. Right? The entrepreneurs figure it out. So I think the essence of it is that you can't let the constraints of anything else, your geography, your government, the economy, the macro, impact what you're doing as an entrepreneur, because what you're doing as an entrepreneur is starting from nothing and creating something. And in the startup community, you're doing exactly the same thing. And so that same skill set applies. All right, so that was longer than 15 minutes, but whatever. I haven't practiced this speech, clearly. Let's go wherever you guys want in terms of questions. Again, it can be about this, it can be about anything else.
I had a question, because you just said it. I was going to ask you about, so that many people becoming involved in that, has it made a difference in the business community and the welcoming? And you just kind of hit that. So is there a branch over somehow into person government to be a little bit more friendly with business?
Well, so yes and no. I'll tell a story. In Boulder, for those of you that have been to Boulder, you've been on the Pearl Street Mall, and you see in Boulder we don't have any tall buildings. So the city a long time ago decided two things that were really powerful in terms of the way the place looks and feels. One is that no building could be taller than three stories, except for apparently the couple of buildings that are. Which I've never quite understood. Like I asked it, how did that ugly thing get to be 8 stories tall? Nobody has an answer to that question. Yeah. So I think it's 4 stories is whatever the maximum height restriction is. And the other is that there's a huge amount of open space that the city and the county owns that really creates this sort of very nice intermix between downtown core and lots of other stuff. What we ended up with, though, is a lot of these buildings that are 2 stories tall or 3 stories tall. And what you get is this idea that you have, I'd never heard this, by the way, till about 2 years ago. You have first floor businesses and second floor businesses, even if you have a third and a fourth floor. The first floor businesses are retail, restaurants, retail stores, et cetera. The second floor businesses and up are offices. Historically, the second floor businesses in downtown were professional, lawyers, accountants, who knows what they were. It turns out that wasn't really true. There was kind of this mix of startups and tech companies and design companies and a whole bunch of stuff mixed in with the lawyers and the accountants and the whatever. In the last decade, many of the lawyers and accountants have sort of been pushed out of the downtown core. And that these second floor businesses are startups. And they're startups that are increasingly getting bigger. 80 people, 100 people, 200 people, spread across a couple of locations. The first floor businesses in Boulder, there was this thing that happened in 2008 that people refer to as the global financial crisis. And it played out in 2009, 2010. We didn't notice it in Boulder. Like, I'm sure there were some people that noticed it, but it was not really that noticeable because there's incredible startup activity. And all of those restaurants and everywhere else in the country, like I ran a marathon in Cincinnati, and I had not been to Cincinnati before that I could remember. Maybe I'd been there once, but I didn't really remember it. And my wife Amy and I, before marathon, and we tend to like walk around the day before. And we were walking around Cincinnati, like every other store in the downtown core, every other storefront is closed, like, you know, tape on the window. And then we got like 4 blocks away. It's like, oh shit, we better turn around. Like, this is not good. Right? It just wasn't like the whole downtown, which was clearly, huge office buildings. Like it was just devastated by the financial crisis. I don't know what happened, like whether it was, everybody, I don't know the story of it, but it was so noticeable. And I've been to plenty of places around the country, and you hear sort of the rhetoric. The people in the first floor of these buildings, the local business community, the small business community, had no understanding of what was going on. They didn't realize that the reason that their restaurants and their art galleries and their other stores weren't going out of business was because all the people that worked above them who were making, 50, 75, 100,000, 150,000 more a year in salary were coming and having lunch every day. And that the business meetings were coming from people were coming from out of town and having the meetings every day. And so you had this very vibrant place that was not because it was such a quaint little town nestled in the mountains that had this great tourism, whatever bullshit that the government city did a good job of in the streets. All that was nice. But the reason it worked was that you had all of these people who were working all day long that could work anywhere, but they had chosen to cluster in this area. You would think that a progressive city would understand the dynamics of that and would try to lean in, but it doesn't really understand that, right? They're more worried about, are we carbon neutral on a global basis? Well, but the people there, they're not manufacturing anything, right? So it's a constant struggle, and so my conclusion in that constant struggle, I'll give it color for it, right? There's the utopian phenomena, there's no stable state, doesn't matter. And so this is why you take a long-term view as an entrepreneur. Don't worry about it. Just keep doing it because people will be attracted to it. And it's not that the entrepreneurs crowd everybody else out. I had this conversation with somebody 2 years ago, like, there's too many entrepreneurs in town. What are you talking about? Well, it used to be this really cool place to hang out, and now you get all these, software guys sitting around the coffee shop with their MacBooks. I'm like, really? I mean, like there's an element of that. No matter where you go, you're always going to get some of that. You just ignore it, right? And you just keep building what you can build. Go ahead.
So, Brad, I was fortunate enough to attend the summit for Startup America there in Boulder.
Yep.
And in the mid-90s, I was working in the Valley, and just I got to attend the meetup that Tuesday night, and the energy, it was like being back in Silicon Valley in '97. I mean, it was just amazing to feel the energy from the entrepreneurs that presented that night, and just in the room was packed, 250 people, no place to sit. How's that energy created? I mean, we'd love to see that kind of energy.
Took a long time. You're doing it. I mean, this is, I would say you're doing it. It took a long time. Okay, and it didn't start in 1996 when I moved to Boulder. It started before that, right? And so really, if you look at the latest arc in Boulder, it started around 2003. So right, post-internet bubble sort of coming out of it. And it's now a decade of a steady climb built off of lots of roots. But the roots were small, right? The amount of stuff there in the 70s and the 80s was small. But it was a sense of independence. It was a sense of you can do your own thing. It was a sense of, there were plenty of people that were attracted to that place because they wanted to be in Boulder. By 2003, what you had a bunch of entrepreneurs who had just, had on software specifically, but most of the entrepreneurial ecosystem was pretty beaten up by it. It wasn't just software internet, it was infrastructure, it was comms. Biotech's had its own up and down cycles through independent of the internet bubble, but a lot of investors sort of shied away from biotech for a period of time. Clean tech wasn't a construct yet, right? There's a lot of turbulence in 2001, 2002, but by 2003 you started to have this steady build again. And in 2008, a short-term view, 2008 would have had a negative impact on all that. But the entrepreneurs by 2008 didn't care about the global macro. The angel investors didn't flee. Were there some angel investors who felt less rich? Sure, right? But they still did stuff. Were there some entrepreneurs who, thought they were worth $10 million and now are worth $5 million? Yes, but they were working on their next thing and they weren't playing for another $5 million. They were playing for something bigger this time around. So it just took sort of building that and continuing, day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year to sort of grind it through. And so that we find ourselves in the middle of 2012, we're 20 years away from glory still. And I think if you wandered around Boulder and talked to, and you got a sense of it from the room, people are showing up at the New Tech Meetup not because we're victorious and it's great. It's because they're hungry for more. And the more you have, the hungrier you get. And did Robert in that meeting, he asked how many people here are new tonight, right? And about half the hands went up. It amazes me every time that happens. Not because I don't think that there's, thousands of more people who want to be part of it. It's because it's awesome that this sort of notion of you don't have to show up every time. You don't have to be at everything. You don't have to, you can't, right? You're an entrepreneur. You're busy. You're running your own business. But for the first couple of years, an awful lot of the people who are the leaders, who, by the way, again, were not elected, right? Robert wasn't elected the king of the New Tech Meetup. He just started doing it. And he started doing it because he came to Boulder from New York, and he's like, they do this thing in New York called New Tech Meetup. It's pretty cool. I think I'll just see if I can do that here because I want to meet some more entrepreneurs. My partner, Jason, started Open Coffee Club in Boulder because he literally said to me, hey, I want to get to know some more people here locally because I don't know people here locally. And I introduced him to some people. He's like, I want to meet some of my own people. I don't want to meet your friends. I want to meet other people. I said, I heard this thing that this guy Saul Klein's doing called Open Coffee Club. It sounds kind of interesting. Just coffee at a coffee shop. Just put the word out that you're having coffee every other week at one of the coffee shops. Just pick one and see what happens. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. And before you know it, right, he's got a whole bunch of friends. I don't even know who they are. But those friends overlap with some of my friends. And when I say friends, I mean friends sort of broadly, in terms of people who are interested in entrepreneurial dynamics. And that just kind of builds. But you have to keep doing it. And when Open Coffee Club one week was 27 people instead of 34 people, there was no depression. When the New Tech Meetup was half empty one week, 1 month, it was like, well, why was that? Okay, well, last month was kind of shitty because we didn't do a very good job of curating the people, and we scheduled it. Oh shit, tonight was an election. Today was an election. Okay, right? Like you think about in real time what's going on the same way you do with your business. Right? And so by having people who sort of own the things continue to work on the things, it just builds over time. But this is cumulative dynamic, again, of having a long-term view. Go ahead.
Do you anticipate the VC community moving from a hierarchy to the network anytime soon?
So a couple things. One is the VC is not a community. That's important. I want to break it down. It's a rich question. There's a lot in that question. Number two is there are a number of archetypes of VCs. And one of the mistakes I think a lot of entrepreneurs make is that you sort of put all VCs into a single archetype or even 2 or 3 archetypes. There's actually quite a number of different archetypes. There's also a phenomena going on that's different right now that's having a lot of impact on how venture capital works, which is the combination of it costing much less money to get to a demonstrable point in your company. If you want to scale your company significantly, you still may need a meaningful amount of capital. But to get to a point where it's either interesting or not interesting takes a lot less money from a VC perspective. From an entrepreneur perspective, it's something different, which is I just need a little bit of money to get to the next level. But it's not I need to raise a bunch of money to get to this point where I can raise more money to get to this point where maybe the thing I have is working. Right? So those dynamics have changed. And then the geographic dynamics have changed. We went from a zone where the only places where you saw lots of VC activity was on the coasts, mostly Boston and San Francisco, or the Bay Area, Silicon Valley, whatever you want to call it. In the 80s and early 90s, and then through the internet bubble, there was this huge amount of regional venture capital. And all of these venture capital initiatives in cities and states, with the idea, some of it was economic development focused, some of it was return seeking, and all of that shit blew up after the internet bubble. And most of the funds that were regional funds were very poor performers. And even when we went and raised our fund in 2007 for Foundry Group, we're all for in Boulder, Colorado. People would say to us, how could you make any money in Boulder, Colorado? We said, we don't invest in Boulder, Colorado. We're national investors. They said, we've invested in a whole bunch of funds in Colorado and none of them have been successful. We don't invest in Colorado. We're national investors. And they can't hear that, right? Because we're in Boulder, Colorado. So you have this dynamic where people want you to look like a certain thing as a venture capitalist as your investors. So then you end up with this relatively small number of firms that are super successful, and they kind of do whatever they're going to do. Most of those firms, by the way, have become asset management firms. Right? They've opened China operations and India operations and clean tech focus, and they've raised increasing amounts of funds, and you go on their websites and they've got 97 people working for them, which, by the way, was the mistake we fell into, or a mistake we fell into, Mobius, not the only one. And then you've got firms that are purposefully not growing. Us, Union Square Ventures, Spark, yeah, maybe they grow a little bit, True Ventures, right? But they're very focused on what they're doing. First round capital. So very different dynamics. Let me get back to the core question, but I wanted to describe the archetype differences so you got a sense of it. Historically, venture firms didn't really have clear strategies. See, I scared somebody away already. I'm just teasing you. Thanks for coming. Usually, they had playbooks more than they had strategies. Right? We'll do an investment, then we need to find a co-investor to mark up our round, and then we have to find another co-investor to mark up our, whatever that playbook was. That shifted, and I think you have a number of firms that have strategies. You know, we have a very well-defined strategy, and we don't have any change in our strategy. What's happening is that firms that like to work with each other are tending to work with each other more. And firms that have some strategy alignment tend to work with each other more in one category. I don't know whether that's 10% or 20% of the everything. Then you've got a bunch in the middle that are still running off their old playbooks. Many of them are struggling to figure out what to do. They're struggling because they've got a whole bunch of people, their strategies have changed, their asset management firms are trying to manage a bigger institution, they're going through generational shifts, the old people are old and rich, and the young people are trying to find their way, and they're trying to figure out who has what. And then you have a bucket that just suck. Right, so those are the three categories, right? People that have really interesting strategies and are doing unique things, and they're pretty clear about what they're trying to do. People in the middle that include a bunch of successful firms historically that are struggling to figure out how to do it, and then a bunch that just suck. The suck are going to die. They're just going to go away. We got a whole bunch more venture firms that are going to go away. The ones in the middle, some are going to figure it out, some won't. Most of them will be fine for a while because it takes a long time to kill a venture firm. And I think the ones that will be successful will probably beget other firms that have subsets of them that have strategies. And some will be successful as large firms because they have market power as large firms. The network is evolving in that first group. Right?
And it's interesting because that's kind of a look behind strategy for, you know, from what I've seen in VC firms that you classify into the strategy bucket. And it also makes me wonder that if you had a startup community and you said, all right, in Bozeman, here's our startup community strategy. What would that community look like? You know, that startup community look like if we employed the same kind of tactics? And I guess it's just interesting to me because people who are innovating often don't fall into strategies that have necessarily worked before.
I think that's fair. I would add, though, I don't think that venture capital as an industry and venture capital firms as a specific tend to be particularly innovative. They're mostly just doing something that's having been done for a while, as evidenced by the fact that the term sheet that you get presented with is the same one that was created 30 years ago on a typewriter. More importantly, venture capital is a service provider to the entrepreneur. And I think this is a mistake a lot of entrepreneurs make, and it's a mistake many venture capitalists make. A startup community does not need venture capitalists. It simply doesn't. We don't have much in Boulder. Remember, we're in Boulder, but we're national. We invest everywhere. And yeah, we invest plenty in Boulder, but there's not a lot of local venture capital in Boulder. In fact, when there was a lot of local venture capital in Boulder, which by the way there was in 2000, 2001, 2002 through 2000, didn't perform very well. A lot of startups got funded that were kind of crappy. And the startups were overfunded, and they hired a bunch of people, and they drove, salaries up and rents up, but they didn't really generate anything that was substantive. They weren't efficient consumers of entrepreneurial capital. Right? So you got the imbalance the wrong direction. So I don't think I view venture capitalists as particularly innovative or frankly that important. They're a feeder, right? So I shouldn't say not that important. They're not disproportionately important in the evolution. Capital is needed. You need capital, but there's lots of sources for capital. Then if you look on the other side of it, one of the mistakes I think we make as humans is we anthropomorphize things. So government is often anthropomorphized. We think of government as a person. Government did this to me, right? Government fucked me, right? I mean, that's the phrase that my wife and I, that echoes around my house about government, right? But it's government did a thing to, right? Government did a thing to the financial industry. No, that's not really what happened. What happened was a bunch of individuals in government created policy that caused some effect. Now you're no longer sort of in this anthropomorphized world. A startup community can't be anthropomorphized. A network can't be anthropomorphized. A hierarchy can't be anthropomorphized. A hierarchy is easy to think of that way, but a network is not. A network it moves around, it's fragile, it's ever changing, right? A hierarchy, there's usually a boss. So, our government, we think of Obama, right? Or we think of, whomever we want to, Nancy Pelosi or Boehner or whomever. Like you can think of a person. I don't even know who. I was going to try to come up with your governor here, but I don't even know who your governor is. Schweitzer. You think of Schweitzer. Is he loved or hated? Both, right? Schweitzer did great things for Montana. Schweitzer destroyed Montana. Our government is awesome. Our government is terrible. But in a network, you don't have that, right? You just have lots of stuff happening. And I think that's why the startup community phenomena is so powerful, is because it's fundamentally a network. So it's very hard to, Brad is doing the startup community in Boulder wrong. I'm not doing anything. I mean, I'm doing stuff, but I'm not doing anything about the startup community. I'm making and if my contribution's wrong, everybody's going to ignore it because it's stupid. Because I have no power. Oh, yes, you have power, you have money, you're venture. It doesn't matter. I mean, if I don't play well, I have to live with that. That's different than in a hierarchy. So I think that's kind of the nature of it. And again, VCs love to, I try to be, I get asked this question. Here's a question that sort of begs, Brad, are you a VC or something else? I am now a VC. Right? There are lots of VCs who were entrepreneurs. So they have probably a better chance of thinking how an entrepreneur, or a better chance of relating to how an entrepreneur thinks than a VC who has never been an entrepreneur. But that is not necessarily true, right? I'm good friends with Fred Wilson. Fred Wilson's never been an entrepreneur, but man, does he understand how VCs, or how entrepreneurs think and what they have to deal with and struggle and relate to. So there aren't these absolutes. And the same thing happens in the startup community. I don't know what's best for Bozeman. Doesn't matter. If you take a 20-year view, if entrepreneurs lead it, if the people that want to do it are passionate about it and are inclusive, anybody wants to engage, and you actually do stuff, let's have a conversation in 20 years. And you're going to do a bunch of things that are different than what we did in Boulder, and there's probably a bunch of things you're going to do that are different than we did in Boulder that are going to be magical, that we can learn from. And it's in our best interest, people that are leaders in Boulder, to know leaders in other startup communities, a la the Startup America thing, so they can learn from each other. Oh, you're doing that? Well, that's interesting. I think I'll form a committee to study that. No, it's interesting. I'm just going to go do it. And that's the essence, right? That's what I'm coming back to the same thing. Just do it. Go ahead.
So, how do you approach roadblocks for growing these groups? Because one of the issues in Montana is that there's a lot of people, but we're really spread out, and there's a lot of distance between one place to the next.
Yeah.
would love to be able to bring it to some of those smaller towns, and sometimes there's not even an internet connection to bring them in.
Yep. So let me answer it abstractly and then specifically. Okay, there are two ways to go through a roadblock. Pretend that's a roadblock. Right? Two ways, right? This is one. Not very effective, right? And this is the other. Right? Entrepreneurs do this all day long. And essentially, this is a constraint. And, the issue is figure out how to get past whatever the constraint is. And sometimes you're going to just keep running into the thing because you can't see past it. And that's okay, right? It's like, okay, that didn't work. Let me try that again. Okay, it still didn't work. Okay, it still didn't work. All right. I'm not going to do that again. Damn it, I did that again. It still doesn't work. And then you eventually, right? So use that metaphor when you're thinking about it because you're going to keep running into stuff. The Eric Ries Lean Startup, Fail Fast, Pivot dynamic. Internalize that, right? Fail fast doesn't mean quit what you're doing. Fail fast means this is not an effective way to get through the wall, right? That hurt. I don't like that, right? So make it specific. I describe startup communities as being collections of startup neighborhoods. And a startup neighborhood is a tight concentration of entrepreneurial activity, startup activity. It doesn't have to be a certain amount. If you look at a city like Boston or New York or San Francisco or Silicon Valley, there are a bunch of neighborhoods in the community that's called the Bay Area, that's called New York. How many people here know New York at all? Anybody? Okay. In New York, there's probably a half a dozen concentrations of startup activity. There's one around Union Square. There's one in Houston. There's one near Cooper Union. There's one sort of in, I don't know what the neighborhood is called, but between 30 and Times Square, 35 and Times Square. So there's these areas where there's just a bunch of stuff. I like to say all of Boulder fits in one building in Manhattan, right? Just for scale. But in Manhattan, you don't have all of Manhattan as a startup community. You have lots of places. In Brooklyn, you have a couple of places. So there's these clusters. You go to Boston, you have Kendall Square, you have Central Square, you have Harvard Square, which are all one subway stop away, but they're very different little neighborhoods. And then you have Boston, you have Four Point Channel and the Leather District and the Industrial District, Innovation District, which is Fan Pier. So these are different neighborhoods that make up the broader community. Here, my guess is Bozeman is a neighborhood and Missoula is a neighborhood. And so how could you make Missoula work and how could you make Bozeman work? I learned something tonight. We drove past America. What did you call America?
I know America.
We went to America. In Missoula, that's the area we just passed. It has like all the the fast food restaurants and stuff. It was awesome, right? Don't locate your startup community in America. Right? Pick like a 4x4 block area that's the fun part of town and put your startups there. And when I say put your startups there, the government doesn't mandate that your startups are there, but all the entrepreneurs just collect around each other. When you're thinking about make it visible so that people know where the companies that are starting up are. When somebody's trying to start another company and you've got an extra desk, say, don't rent some space, just come camp out in my extra desk. No, don't pay me any money. You don't have any money. I'll let you leech off my internet. Someday do something good for me. Right? It's not I got to figure out how I can make an extra $100 a month to pay. Just, it's cool. Do something good for me someday. It'll come back to you 10 times over. But try to get everybody in one place. Same thing with Bozeman. So that Bozeman then becomes this interconnected piece. Then as you have people that are not physically on top of each other, they're in other parts of the state, work hard to make it very networked virtually. Right? They don't have internet access. Okay, I got it. You have some. I spent some time in Alaska Colorado has, the rural internet problem too. There's some edge constraints. Don't worry about the edge constraints. Make it easy. When somebody comes to Bozeman, they should always have a place to hang out and work. And not just one. Make it really easy for people to find. When somebody comes to Missoula, make it really easy for them to find. When somebody drives from Bozeman to Missoula, make sure everybody in Missoula knows you're coming. And for God's sakes, Missoula people, have dinner for the person. And not the same 4 people every time. Because you got to eat. Put some energy into it. And vice versa. When people go to Bozeman, not the same 4 people. Just move it around. But make that easy, whether it's this group or whether it's another meetup group or whether it's just informal email. Again, use that network dynamic to move it around. I showed up here, I got a meal out of it, and I got to talk to some people. It's not hard, right? And you can say, yeah, but we wanted you here. Okay, that's fine, right? But every day, every day I get emails from people who say, I'm coming to Boulder on such and such a day. And if, I meet with 1 out of 50 of them. But the other, 30 of them, the other 29 of them, 49 of them, plenty of other people get together with them because we move them around. Just let that energy build, but build it over a period of time. Like it won't happen next month. Right? Somebody will come here, oh fuck, I forgot to tell people I was coming here. Right? That's okay. Or you show up and nobody's around to camp at their desk. You're like, okay, that didn't work. How hard is it to hack something together so that you have an email list so people can say, I'm looking for a desk to camp out for the day, right? And then spread that out to the regions that are not part of the neighborhoods. Right? So tactics like that, just getting people together, interacting more with each other. I use a phrase, I haven't used it yet tonight, but I'm gonna put it out there. It's a deeply rooted part of what goes on in Boulder. It's very hippie-ish, which is give before you get. So our whole premise for being as a startup community, everybody gives before they get. Pay forward. Pay forward. Right? It's like this thing that I did with this kid. Right? I'm trying to get people to use the phrase random act for kindness, right? Random act of kindness. Every marathon I'm running a marathon every state. This will be 22 that I run on Sunday. Thanks for the warm weather, by the way. And
No smoke.
No smoke, that's good. And it's flat and it's low elevation for me. It should be easy. As easy as a marathon is. And Amy and I decided we're going to give a $5,000 match for every marathon we give using the site Give Forward to a random person. Just nobody we know. Just random person that's having a fundraiser that's got, cancer. This is all cancer. It's to pay your own medical bills. So it's not philanthropic, or it's not charity, or it's not a tax deductible thing. It's just these people sort of say, I can't pay my medical bills, I'm struggling, I need some help. And we're explicitly looking for people who have a decent amount they need and are having trouble getting the thing off the ground. Right, so if somebody's raising $100,000 for lupus, something or other, and they've got $62,000, that's not the campaign we're doing. We're looking for the kid like this that has a $2,000 goal, has $200, and has testicular cancer, and lives somewhere in Texas. And clearly he needs more than $2,000. And we just show up and all of a sudden he has $10,000 and it's crazy, right? So it's that mentality writ large, right? I will help you as a startup. I will help you as an entrepreneur without any expectation of what I'm getting back. If I do that for you 30 times in a row and I get nothing back, there is a curve that looks like this.
Yellow card.
Pardon?
Yellow card.
No, not a yellow card, because I didn't expect. I do. Here's a yellow card. Somebody asked me today. Says, "I've done a bunch for you. I'd like you to do something." No, it says, "You are not helping me." They said to me, "You are not helping me enough." This was an email. Person sent me a note. It says, "I need you to help me more." It's interesting. I'm not sure what you're talking about. Like, help me understand. Like, I didn't say go fuck yourself, right? Like, help me understand what you're talking about. And I had done an interview for this person. Like they wanted to do an interview with me. I gave them an interview, promote their website. It was a fine interview, whatever. It ended up being high maintenance for me, but whatever. I was happy to do it. 6 people saw it, right? So it was good for him, not for me, probably. And then lots of back and forth emails, lots of questions to me, of which I was trying to give him some constructive feedback. And he finally sort of says, "You're not helping me." And I said, "Well, what do you want help with?" And then he said something else, I can't remember what it was, that was completely abstract. And then that led to the, "You're not helping me enough." And I said, "Well, what does that mean?" And he says, "Well, I did this thing for you, and now I expect you to do something for me." And I said, "Do me a favor, please don't ever ask me to do something, please don't ever do something for me again." Right? And I said, "The thing that you were telling me that you did for me was actually me for you. It benefited you. It cost me time and energy, and all this other stuff did. And so I don't want that relationship." Then I gave him a yellow card, right? But it wasn't because of the interaction. It was at that moment that he stepped over the line and, sort of turned his messed up view around it. So I think it's really, you just do it for a while. It tails off. It's like assignments. But the community also filters out those people. I say in the book, if somebody's a taker and they don't ever give anything back to the system, they won't last long in a community. But if you're approaching everything by what can I do to add something to this, it will come back to you many, many, many times over in lots of unexpected ways. It won't happen the day after you do something, right? It is, again, a long-term view. And if you're not motivated to do it for a long term, it's very hard to do. But I would put that really out there, again, sort of along this vein, if you use this sort of construct of give before you get. But just because somebody is not, I have this other thing. The yellow card thing is very interesting because it's a good friction point on this issue, because you definitely often feel the other. Like, Amy and I have this conversation. Okay, I'm really tired today. Why are you tired? I just did 30 things for other people. Did anybody do anything for you? I don't know, maybe somewhere. Right? Like, it's all one way sometimes. You feel that? The interesting dynamic, though, is if you don't have an expectation in an interaction about what you're going to get back from that particular interaction, it's actually pretty invigorating to help somebody else. And so occasionally the other will come back around. Somebody say, "You've helped me so much, what can I do for you?" And my response is, don't do something for me. Go find somebody else that needs your help and help them. And that's another thing in the community. The people that are the leaders early, the next wave of people that engage may say, "I need some way to pay back that first person." The best way to pay back that first person is to often do something for somebody that's not engaged yet. Right? In other words, pay it forward, that same dynamic, versus that. Because, for me, the emotional reward of seeing the vibrancy of the Boulder startup community is reward in and of itself for my contribution into it. And I think you could think about the same thing in Bozeman and Missoula, and then those are the neighborhoods, and then that rolls up to the state, and then you look at it and say you have a lot of vibrancy going on in the state. That's powerful. Go ahead.
I just had a quick question regarding your 4 points. Obviously, you believe they're all absolutely critical for vibrant startup communities to form. Could you expand at all on maybe if there's one in your experience more than the others that should receive more focus and that kind of thing?
Yeah, the first. The four, they're in order. Okay. I should be clear about that. And it's interesting. I wonder if I'm not clear about that in the book. Probably not. It's too late. The book's done. Guess that's why we have a blog. Oops. Should have asked me that question a week ago. The most important is that entrepreneurs have to lead. That's a necessary and sufficient condition. If you don't have it, forget it. Right? You can have the other three. If you don't have entrepreneurs leading it, it's not going to happen.
So you kind of talked about, generating the Y Combinator started first in the Bay Area, and then you had one in Boulder.
Techstars. That other one, the one that starts with the letter Y, whatever. Yeah, they're good. They do interesting things, but Techstars.
Techstars in Boulder.
Techstars, right?
Doug needs a t-shirt.
To other regions as well.
Yeah.
Do you see that as the entrepreneur scene as more of a zero-sum game, or do you, and therefore people will be moving out of the San Francisco area, or do you think that it's now growing larger than that?
I talk about this a lot in the book, so I got this right. I talk about playing not a zero-sum game. It's explicitly the opposite of a zero-sum game. We are so undersaturated in the amount of startup activity going on in the world right now. We're nowhere near any sort of constraint. Geography, by the way, is completely artificial in the United States, right? Around the world, it matters some. Like different countries have different issues. You know, you cross a country border, even you go into Canada. If you go to northern North America, or northern United States, that's what I call Canada, northern United States, right? You still, they have to have a visa to get here. We don't need a visa to go to them. Maybe we do now. But if you go from, like I flew from Colorado to Montana today, and I didn't have to, like it was easy, right? There's no border crossing, and there's maybe a sign that says, hey, you're in Montana now. What is Montana? Not the Big Sky State?
Treasure State.
Treasure?
It is the Big Sky, that's.
Big Sky Country.
But what is Treasure State?
Treasure State.
Treasure?
Mining, yeah.
That's all the extraction.
We're not allowed to do any of those.
Okay, I got it. I was just like, I had not,
We make treasures.
I got it.
We're all pirates.
You're all pirates, yeah, with all those big oceans around you. The first thing that came to mind was a ship and a flag. I'm like, Treasure State. Too much time playing Treasure Island on Facebook for me. So geography is an artifact of political boundaries mostly in the United States. And the neat thing about the U.S. is very easy to move from one place to another. You don't have to get permission. You don't have to do it. You just do it. And so every region as a geography has an incentive to be better. And so you have a couple of different things going on. You have government doing their thing. I'll give you a tax break to move here, big headquarters, more jobs, whatever. But then you have the bottoms-up phenomena, which is entrepreneur-driven, startup-driven, which is just cool companies getting created, and people are attracted to those cool companies, or they're attracted to the region because they want to be near the cool companies, or they get hired by a company in the region, right? And those companies grow over time, and of course, long cycles, right? You could have a situation where, Bethlehem Steel in Pennsylvania was an incredibly, important, Pittsburgh was an incredibly important place at one point in time for steel, and now it's not, right? Those things are just broad cycles, but, those are cycles that typically outlast the 20-year cycles. I think as a result, there's so much opportunity for expansion, especially in the world where natural resources are not the constraint. The constraint now is this, right? The constraint is smart people. Well, you have here and in Bozeman a thing that generates more of this every year, right? How many kids are in the university here?
12,000.
And how many in Bozeman? Right, so 12,000 total or 12,000 a year? 12,000 total.
It was 14, I think it's closer to 5
So,
years ago.
so divide by,
Here, and I think Bozeman's just slightly different.
okay, so 2,500 to 4,000 kids a year graduate. It's a renewable resource every year, and they're here, there's a chance for them to stay. And so why would they stay? That's a question that you have to answer in your own community. But I can tell you that a big part of them staying is that they have places to work that are interesting to them, that engage them intellectually with the future, rather than a place where they go and they punch a clock and have to pull a lever all day long. Right? Right? So build a community that's creative and smart and inclusive and reaches into the university when kids are younger, not when they're the day before they're graduating, but when they're sophomore and freshman, engage them in what's going on in the startup community. You're so far from saturating. It's so powerful. And so I look at it from that frame of reference. I think that the coastal startup communities have interesting dynamics that are different, some of it being density and critical mass by definition, right? living in Boston for 12 years, the density of people in Boston is very different than the density of people here in Colorado. But that's a weakness too, because there's an awful lot of people that's not where they want to live. And it's fun to live there for a little while, but that's not where you want to live your life. And so that's an opportunity in lots of different places. What happens in those cities, and this comes back to the idea of a city. Every city in the United States, every city in the world, but every city in the United States was a startup. I don't remember when Missoula was started, 18-something, 1870, 1860-something? 1855? There's like two people. I looked it up on Wikipedia today. Two people started it, a man and a woman. I don't remember their names. And that's what Wikipedia says, right? And like there's a history. Like how did they end up here, and why were they here, and what were they doing? And now you have 65,000 people here. How did that happen? Right? So this sort of phenomena, it's of us as humans, and so I think we get this opportunity to keep doing it over and over again. So don't play a zero-sum game. Boston and New York play a zero-sum game. We got to get companies to move from Boston to New York, says New York. And so they try to get, isn't it so great that we got these companies moved from Boston to San Francisco, says San Francisco. Okay, got it, whatever. Focus on, what you've got. And if people are leaving, if 50% of your college graduates are leaving every year because there's nothing for them to do, they don't like it there, they want to go somewhere else, understand that. Don't set up a committee to understand that. And oh, by the way, you're probably not going to get it from 50% to 10%, but maybe you can get it from 50% to 45% over a period of time. And if those 5% are 5% that are all leaning into creating new things and building stuff, that's awesome. That's a good thing. In the back.
So when you're trying to get a startup community off the ground, how important would you say is vetting ideas kind of versus helping people grow whatever their idea is? I mean, how does vetting kind of play into that?
Ideas don't matter. They just don't matter. Helping people grow and develop is so much more important for a couple of reasons. One is, it's really hard to get the vetting right. It's just really hard. I mean, I'm pretty good at it and I blow it a lot. So, it creates an artificial slowdown that you don't need. Bad ideas will die. And they generally die pretty quickly now. That's kind of cool. Right? It's hard to perpetuate something that sucks. You can for a while, but it dies. The key is, it must be totally, completely okay to fail. I started this thing, it didn't work, I learned from it, I lost $500,000 of my investor money, I dealt with it gracefully, picked myself up, I'm doing it again. That has to be okay. If the community doesn't let that be okay, you got a different problem. The neat thing culturally about the US is that's pretty hardwired into us. We're pretty okay with that as a society. Different parts of the country have different behavior around it. There's some parts of the country where it's kind of like a badge of honor. And there's other parts of the country where if you haven't had a success and a failure, or if you haven't had a success also, then somehow your failure is magnified. So if your failure comes first, it's an inhibitor. But if it comes second, it's no big deal. Oh, he had success before. She didn't get it right this time, but she'll get it right the next time, right? Especially in a young startup community, it just has to be okay to fail. And you have to keep making progress when people fail. We have this thing in Boulder we call Awake, when W-A-K-E. When a startup fails, some other entrepreneurs take the founders out for dinner. And they celebrate the death of their company. And we have Awake. Everybody gets trashed. We tell stories about, remember when we were first starting it, we had this first idea and we all, and now we blew, oh yeah, we had, and just get it out. And then move on. And it's amazing. Talented people don't run from failure. Talented people, I failed, I learned, next. And supportive communities don't shame failure. I was in Iceland There's a short example in the book of this that I talked about. I was in Iceland at the beginning of the month, totally randomly how I ended up there, and I won't give you the long version of the story. But I was talking to one entrepreneur who was, and by the way, everybody in Iceland failed, right? The whole country failed, right? I mean, in 2008, the Iceland Stock Exchange, the stock index was at 10,000, and 30 days later it was at 14. Not 1,400, not 14. Like it just, like that curve, the Feld effect, in reverse, like to zero. I mean, you know, and it was a country that were people that didn't have anything before they turned themselves into a hedge fund. And then when their hedge fund country blew up, they went back to where they were before. And they're actually a very, you know, it's a really interesting country. It's 300,000 people. It's very self-sufficient. It's independent-minded, very entrepreneurial, spirited pretty broadly. But, you know, in this dynamic, they got very confused with money in 2000 and leverage and banks and what all this stuff meant. And the really interesting thing, I had a lot of long conversations while they have all these beautiful buildings. They're like, well, we have these beautiful buildings now, at least, right? I mean, who knows who owns them, right? But they're there. So there was a lot of failure. And I'm talking to this guy, and I felt like something was wrong, like off. Like I couldn't figure it out. He was a little bitter, very, very smart. And he told me a story, and he'd had a success and a failure, and da-da-da-da-da. And it just didn't feel quite right to me. So when I was with one of my hosts, I said to him, tell me about this guy. Like, something didn't feel right in my conversation with him. And my friend said, when his company failed, he made a mess. And I said, what do you mean, a mess? And he told me some stuff, but it was very non-specific. It didn't sound like a mess to me. The guy didn't do anything illegal. He didn't kill anybody. You know, he didn't steal any money. He failed. But he probably failed publicly, and some ego associated with it, and thrashed around. But it was clear that the community didn't just let him fail and then pick him back up. Like somehow there was something behaviorally. I mean, I asked specifically, anything illegal? No. Did he end up with anybody else's stuff or money? No. Right? Something not quite right. And it was that they were uncomfortable with the magnitude, like this unfathomable failure, right? The entire banking system in the country being nationalized, somehow they could get their mind around that. But the idea that this guy lost all of his investors' money and had to shut the company down, but didn't do it gracefully, right? Was angry or yelled and screamed and kicked and stomped his feet on the way out the door. Something was wrong with him. And I said to him, the guy seems talented. Is he talented? Yeah, he's talented. Somehow figure out how to let that past be the past and let him try again. 2 more questions. You and then you.
You earlier mentioned, I may quote it wrong, but something about VCs don't belong in an entrepreneurial community. You said something about
VCs aren't been under.
In the startup
VC
is not.
Oh, VC is not needed to have a successful.
And that just got me thinking about, you bootstrapped your first thing, went to it, then you found Angel VC, how would you put them in parallel personally? I guess I don't have a specific question, it's just more just a topic, talking a little bit about what you think about funding today, bootstrapping, and is that possible? And now with crowdfunding coming in, as people say, oh, that will take VCs, but there's some crowdfunding sources that don't want equity, and so that's donation crowdfunding versus equity crowdfunding. Just, I'm interested in your thoughts on that.
Sure. So let me play back just so everybody's clear. Strong statement. I have a strong statement that VC is not a critical part of a startup community. Okay? It's an additive part. It's not a negative. It's just not a critical part. And if all you have is the VC money, you don't have what you need. Right? So it's an additive part to the system. And it's the same with any kind of financing, whether it's VC or angel. Having more is good, right? But you don't have to have a lot of it to have success. And interestingly, the more success you have, probably the more access you'll have to it, and not necessarily local in the region. Because people will see the success, they'll say, something interesting is happening in Boulder, Colorado, and you'll have more people come to it. There are lots of, let me answer the crowdfunding last. I believe very strongly that you should build your business with the least amount of capital. There's two reasons. Number one is you get to keep more of your business. So you, the entrepreneur, own more of your business if you need less capital. And less capital along the curve of the business. So take less early, make more progress, so that when you raise the next round of capital that you need, you can raise it at a higher valuation so you take less dilution. Now, at the same time as CEO, you have to observe rule number one of a startup, which is never run out of money. So there's tension between those two concepts, but that's a good tension. Second is, if you can bootstrap your business, by all means bootstrap your business. There may and will come a time in your business where having more capital will allow you to build your business faster, and that could be relatively early in its life or later in its life. The more demonstrable progress you've made with less capital, the easier it is to raise that incremental amount of capital. So stack the decks in your favor versus, I have this idea, will you give me some money? Which almost never works. Sometimes, but people spend an enormous amount of time playing that drill. It almost never works. So yes to bootstrap. Something like crowdfunding, who knows? We talked about this. I don't know how it plays out. There's so much mythology about what it's going to be right now that it's just hard to understand. What is awesome, from my frame of reference, is what Kickstarter has enabled and proven, which is that people will pre-fund a product. Not an equity investment in a company, but a product. I want this thing. Somebody else says they want to build it. I will buy it in advance and commit the money to them with the hope that they can deliver the product to me. And that's what Kickstarter is. And you have, products that raise $100,000 and $10,000 to $25,000, $100,000, and products that raise $5-10 million now. It's crazy, right? Like the idea that you would raise that much money in pre-orders is awesome. You still have to deliver it. And that's non-trivial. It's going to be very interesting when some of the very high-profile Kickstarter campaigns can't deliver their product. Or they deliver their product that they raised $5 million from and it cost them $8 million to deliver it. That's going to happen. And that's good. That's tension again in that dynamic. But that's different than crowdfunding as investment. And I don't think we'll really know what any of that is like until after our government gets done codifying the laws. And then after they get done codifying the laws, I think it's still going to take a while to actually understand what those laws mean. And so I would encourage you not to pay the $49.95 from the online banner ad that says, learn how to do crowdfunding now, because nobody actually knows how to do it.
That's my banner.
I'm sorry, don't do it. Don't. But I think the equity part of that, whether that's going to be additive or not to the dynamic, who knows? How it's going to impact venture capital, I actually don't think it's probably going to impact a bunch of things, but I don't know because I don't know what it's going to look like. My instinct is that it won't have a huge impact. It won't have the same impact that the crowdfunding dynamic has had already. Now, there are a bunch of rules, subtle laws, that would be nice to get fixed in all of this. That would be helpful to things like accelerators like Techstars, things like AngelList, that hopefully get done correctly. That, essentially there's a bunch of regulations that you have to be very careful with what your behavior is promoting an investment. And the crowdfunding laws theoretically relax those constraints. And that's probably a good thing. Because the crowdfunding law, or the current laws are, from many, many years ago. They really don't, that's right, 70s, they don't reflect, the internet and the web. They're akin to typewriter term sheet. And so it'd be nice to not have to be living with that.
So I've got a cool idea that I've been working on this website. And there's...
Here you go.
No, that's not my question.
I'm just...
my question is, there's probably like 100 different ways to take an idea to a successful business, but what are some good paths that you recommend? Like, do I need to be looking for co-founders, customers, angel investors, like?
I would follow I would go down the following path. you want to get your idea into product form as quickly as you possibly can and get it out into the world where people can interact with it, whatever that means. So your focus should be on doing the things that you need to do to get from the idea that's in your head, to that outcome, which is get the thing out there. If that means that you need a co-founder because you're not a developer and you have the idea and you need somebody to help you develop it, or you're a developer and you want a business partner because you don't want to spend a bunch of time on a bunch of other shit because you just want to focus on the idea, all fine, right? Or you say, nah, I don't need any of that stuff to get the thing built. I can get the thing built and out there and see if people respond to it. But to do that, I need the following thing. Figure out what the least constraints are to get it out there, because getting it out there gives you real feedback. And until you get it out there, you're just thinking about the idea. And I think the mistake that so many people make in startups is they get tangled up in this cycle around the idea rather than doing something, and you end up in classic failure to thrive. Right? You know, you're not watering your plant. You're just sitting there looking at your plant. And now the plant is wilting. And you don't have the resources to get the water. You know, all you have to do is go to the kitchen and get a cup and put some water on the plant, but you just keep looking at the plant, hoping it's going to be okay.
Somebody else makes the plant in the meantime.
Yeah, that's right. And yeah, in the plant, they build a fucking nursery, right? I mean, right? So you have to just do, right? Again, that mindset of just getting out there and doing it. Try to put the least number of constraints in front of you. And then once you have it there, then you have to get to the next level. And this is a challenging part of the dynamic of a startup, is what's the next level? Well, you get to define it. The nice thing today is that there's an awful lot of information that helps you understand it. So I think for any technical entrepreneur, Eric Ries's book is a phenomenal book to read. Right? So, you know, you read Lean Startup, it's relatively easy to read. It's got plenty of stories in it. It's got some very specific stuff. And I can summarize the whole book in a sentence. Build it, ship it, measure it. Keep building it based on what you measure. That's it. It's the whole book. But he really gives you a bunch of tools for how to think about it. But that's the driver. The worst thing you could do as an entrepreneur is have money be the barrier to making progress. Right? Money should be fuel. But if it's the thing, I can make progress if I have money, the chance of you having that money is low, so the chance of you making progress is low. If I make some progress, I can attract some money, much greater path to go down. All right, so hopefully this was helpful. My email is brad@feld.com. So email me, remind me that you're here. Keep it short because I get a lot. But I'll try to respond. If there's a specific thing I can do to be helpful, or a question I didn't get to, or something you want to talk about, or feedback, hey Brad, that was a great talk, all good. I'm actually quite open to, hey Brad, I didn't understand that. I thought that was an idiotic statement. Why do you think that? What you said here about this will never work in Missoula or Bozeman, here's why. That kind of stuff is really helpful. Stuff that challenges me to think more. Feel free to be as argumentative as you want, or as polite as you want. I don't care. None of that bothers me. And my Twitter is @bfeld. It's an easy way to get my attention too, is to tweet out my name. Thanks. This was fun.